Sarah had always thought her life was simple, calm and predictable. She was a nurse, committed to her work at the local hospital, doing what she loved most, helping others. Her life followed a steady routine. Long shifts at the hospital, weekends spent with Steve, her boyfriend, and evenings filled with the comforting normalcy of their relationship. Steve was a kind, loving man, someone who knew the ins and outs of her busy schedule and never complained about the late nights she often worked. They had been together for over a year, and their bond felt secure, built on mutual respect and affection. It was a love that felt uncomplicated like the life Sarah thought she would have forever. But life, it seemed, had a different plan. It all began one fateful night when Sarah stayed late at work. There had been an unexpected surge in emergency cases, and Sarah, like the rest of the medical staff, was caught up in the frantic rush to help as many patients as possible. By the time she finished her shift, the night air felt colder than usual, and the city streets were deserted, save for a few streetlights flickering in the distance. Her feet ached from standing for so long, and all she could think about was getting home to the warmth of her bed. But something was wrong. There was an odd tension in the air, an uneasy feeling that made her glance over her shoulder. Sarah quickened her pace, brushing off the odd sensation, convincing herself that she was just tired. But as she turned a corner, she froze. There, standing at the edge of the sidewalk, was a man. He was tall and muscular, with dark, brooding eyes that seemed to pierce through the night. His presence was powerful, commanding. There was no question that this man was not someone to be trifled with. The stranger made no move toward her, but as their eyes met, Sarah felt a jolt of something she couldn't explain. The man didn't speak. He simply watched her, his gaze unwavering. Sarah felt a chill creep up her spine, but there was something else there too, something magnetic. She couldn't tear her eyes away from his, nor did she want to. "Are you lost?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly despite herself. The man said nothing in return. Instead, he watched her for a moment longer before slowly nodding his head and turning to walk down the street, fading into the shadows of the night. Sarah stood still for a moment, the bizarre encounter lingering in her mind. She couldn't help but wonder who he was, why he was out there in the dark, and why his presence had affected her so profoundly. The next night, the strange encounter replayed itself. As Sarah left the hospital once again, she saw him this time standing on the same corner, watching her, waiting. He didn't approach her, but his eyes followed her every movement. This time, Sarah didn't feel fear. She felt a strange pull, a magnetic attraction she couldn't deny. It wasn't just the man's striking appearance that kept her attention. It was the air of mystery surrounding him, the aura of danger that seemed to wrap around him like a thick cloud. She felt it in the way he stood there, in the way he kept his distance. He wasn't someone who simply wandered the streets. He was there for a reason, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was part of that reason. The following days passed in a blur. Every night, as Sarah made her way home from work, she noticed the same man watching her from the shadows. Sometimes he was further away, his presence distant but undeniable. Other times he was right there, close enough that she could feel the weight of his gaze on her skin. It was impossible to ignore. She began to grow accustomed to his presence, though it still unsettled her. There was something hypnotic about him. She couldn't help but wonder why he was so intent on watching her. Was she in danger? One evening, after yet another exhausting shift, Sarah decided to confront him. As she turned the corner to walk down her usual route, she saw him standing just ahead. This time, his posture was more commanding, his expression unreadable. Without thinking, she walked straight toward him. "Why do you keep watching me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. The man finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "You shouldn't be walking home alone. Not with the way things are around here." Sarah stared at him, confused. "Who are you?" "My name is Jack," he said simply, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I'm here to make sure you get home safely." At first, Sarah thought he was joking. She stepped back, about to brush him off, but then she saw the seriousness in his gaze. There was no hint of humor, no playful tone. This was a man who meant what he said. His words hung in the air, making her feel vulnerable and exposed in a way she hadn't experienced before. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, trying to downplay the tension. "I don't need anyone's protection." But Jack didn't move. Instead, he just stood there watching her. "You're going to be escorted home. For your own safety." Before Sarah could protest, Jack's men, who had been following from a distance, stepped forward. They weren't threatening, they weren't there to hurt her. They were there to keep her safe. The realization hit Sarah like a wave. This wasn't some random encounter. Jack, whoever he was making sure she was never alone, never vulnerable. From that night on, Jack's men followed her every time she worked late. They waited for her outside the hospital, and no matter what route she took, they were there walking beside her, ensuring she was protected from any potential threat. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and intrigue. Why was Jack so insistent on watching over her? Why her, of all people? She didn't understand, but she couldn't deny the comfort she felt knowing that Jack and his men were always nearby. There was something about Jack that made her feel safe, but also something that made her question her own motives. Sarah wasn't the kind of person who welcomed attention, especially not from someone like Jack. But as time passed, she found herself drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. Despite herself, despite the fact that she was in a committed relationship with Steve, she couldn't stop thinking about Jack. He was a mystery, a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. She wanted to understand him, to know who he really was, but every time she tried to ask, he would give her nothing. One day as she walked home, Jack approached her again. This time, his voice was softer, almost comforting. "You're not safe out here," he said. "I'll make sure you're protected. You don't have to ask questions. Just trust me." Something inside Sarah stirred at his words. She had been so focused on her life with Steve, so convinced that everything was as it should be. But the more she saw Jack, the more she realized she didn't want to live a life of safety and predictability anymore. There was something intoxicating about Jack's world. The danger, the excitement, the passion. She didn't know when it happened, but she started to look forward to his presence. She began to long for the moments when he would step into her world. Jack wasn't just protecting her, he was changing her. His world was darker, more thrilling, and she couldn't deny the attraction. The more she saw Jack, the more she realized the tension in her life was growing. Her relationship with Steve began to crack. Steve, who had once been her rock, now seemed like an anchor holding her down. He didn't understand why she was spending so much time with Jack's crew. He didn't trust them, didn't understand her connection to them. But Sarah couldn't help herself. Every time Jack was near, she felt alive. The pull between them was undeniable, and though she tried to fight it, she couldn't resist. It was then that the real trouble began. Rivals from Jack's world took notice of her, believing she was more than just a nurse. They thought she was Jack's lover, and that made her a target. One night, she was attacked by a group of criminals, and though she fought back, they overpowered her. But Jack appeared just in time, throwing himself into the fight, saving her from the men who had come to hurt her. In the aftermath, Sarah knew the truth. She was no longer just an innocent nurse. She had crossed a line and there was no going back. She had become a part of Jack's world, a world full of danger, passion, and turmoil. The decision became clear. Sarah had to choose between the life she knew with Steve and the dangerous, passionate world Jack offered. She had to decide if she would stay in the safety of her old life or embrace the unknown, surrendering herself to Jack's world. In the end, Sarah made her choice. She walked away from Steve, from the life she once knew, and stepped into the darkness with Jack. She was no longer the girl who had walked the streets alone, unsure of where she was going. Now, she was a woman who had embraced the unknown, who had chosen the life she never expected, but one that set her heart on fire. Sarah learned that safety doesn't always come from the places we expect. Sometimes, true safety is found in the most dangerous of places, and it's in the darkness that we truly find the strength to become who we are meant to be. Please subscribe to this channel for more chilling and revealing stories.